Evolved Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Fitzpatrick. Evolved Podcast is an open forum on personal growth and cultivating a positive mindset. Today I have with me NATALIE RAINER. NATALIE is many things. She's a yogi, she's a runner, she's a cyclist, she's a swimmer, she's a swim coach. Tragically, her and a member of the Richmond cycling community, Jonah Holland, last year they were in a cycling accident that resulted in the death of Jonah. NATALIE was severely injured, but she's since made a full recovery, thankfully, and we're going to talk about that as well as her role here in the Richmond community. So, NATALIE, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Is your full-time job currently working with Swim RBA? Is that
Yes.
correct? And you're a swim instructor for kids?
Yeah, so my current title is Assistant Director of Programs, but I have worn a lot of different hats there, and I do a lot of different job functions, including overseeing swim instructors and doing all types of contracting and agreements and scheduling and hiring and onboarding and all of those fun administrative things.
Yeah.
And I started with Swim RBA running a pool in the east end of the city, which we still operate, and we call that Swim RBA Church Hill.
Okay.
So that program is basically a lot of swim lessons for children who live in the East End. And that could be, some folks who are maybe economically disadvantaged, but it could also be just people living in Church Hill. Other nonprofits bring us their participants, and we offer them swim lessons, and then we also offer public swim lessons and swim team, which is really exciting for the East End because there's not really a lot of aquatic access. There's historically been systematic policies that have resulted in a lack of aquatic access for people living in the East End, particularly people of color. So our program in the East End was really focused on providing swim lessons so that folks can feel comfortable at the pool. That could be at the beach, at the river. All of those awesome experiences are scary and life-threatening for people who don't know how to swim.
Right.
So our mission to drown-proof Richmond really starts with increasing access to swim instruction. You can't really have a great time in the ocean if you are scared that you're going to drown. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of our earlier guests on this season, Taylor Bruno, she talked about how at an early age it was important for her parents to get her to learn how to swim, just as a general life skill. And through doing that, she found a love for it so that she could do swimming for triathlons. Is that similar to what your experience was like?
My experience working at Swim RBA?
As far as like learning swimming, at an early age.
Yeah. Gosh, I honestly don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know how to swim. I can pretty vividly remember learning to swim, which I was in preschool swim lessons at the Richmond Jewish Community Center when I was like 3 to 5, and so I can remember learning on a platform, which is if you're in aquatics and you do swim lessons, you'll know what I mean by platform, which is basically makes the deep water shallower for the small children. And I joined the swim team as soon as I could swim across the pool, and I was in competitive swimming here in Richmond. I swam on a team called Nova, which is kind of in the West End. I swam on that team for maybe 12 years, pretty competitively for 12 years, and my first job was being a swim instructor, and then I became a lifeguard and a swim coach, and at some point moved away from aquatics and then somehow circled back. So I think that swimming is a life skill, it's a safety skill, but it's also an opportunity to have job opportunities and compete in triathlon, and to feel confident in your ability to go out there and try new stuff when it comes to water, but also when you learn new skills and you learn to overcome fear, you become more resilient as a person. And so ultimately, you know, we're teaching swimming, but we're teaching people to be confident and to overcome disadvantage or overcome trauma. And so working through all that stuff, it helps them go through a bit of a growth experience as a person, whether that's a child or an adult. And I think it really builds self-esteem. Yeah,
definitely. And I know you could say the same about all the other athletic endeavors that you've done, as far as your yoga practice, as well as your cycling practice. Can you speak to that?
The yoga practice, that's on a whole different page because it's so much bigger than just what you can do with your body. But I think definitely learning how to mountain bike as an adult has really pushed me to overcome so much fear. I mean, I was just the most nervous Nellie beginner mountain biker, just afraid of everything. I can remember being terrified to go through like the smallest little creek crossing. I would be like a horse. I'd come like right up to the creek and just like
right on the brakes.
And you know, you have to work through so much. It's not just the obstacle that's in front of you, it's also all of the storytelling that you do in your mind about why you are not capable of overcoming that obstacle. And the narrative that we weave for ourselves in our minds all day long can really contribute to having a positive outlook on life, and also or the alternative, having a negative outlook. So mindset is something that definitely has a huge impact on your life, and sports can definitely help you to build a stronger, more resilient, more excited, and more courageous outlook and mindset.
Yeah. I have been getting into mountain biking and gravel biking over the past year, and I have been taking my gravel bike that I have. It doesn't have any suspension on the front fork, so that's been holding me back a little bit, but I'm still getting my gravel bike out there on the single track trails and trying to push myself outside of that comfort zone. And it's scary for sure. Like, just getting the hang of like riding my bike on Dogwood Dell trails has been a challenge, and I've definitely gotten more comfortable doing it. The first time I did it was on someone else's hardtail, and I flipped over the handlebars and almost dislocated my shoulder. So just getting back out there and wanting to do it again was a major hurdle, but I started doing it, and I'm more comfortable now, but I'm still got a ways to go, because this past weekend, I was riding when there was some friends, and I had some pretty bad crashes, but I still was able to keep going, and actually got a mild concussion, I think, at one point on the trail after doing a couple loops. Not the best experience, but thankfully I was okay, and I had people with me to check on me. But I totally get that fear of pushing past your limits of what you think is possible, and finding that confidence in yourself as not just a person, but as a rider, and just reminding yourself of that in your daily life too, is huge.
Yeah. One thing I've really grown to value about mountain biking and cycling as a whole, both road, gravel, and mountain biking all have a bit of a meditative effect on the mind. When you find that flow state and you can just move through the world and through the environment with ease and efficiency, you know, you can really let your mind kind of work itself out. And maybe you find, like, if you're road biking, there's that like white painted line on the edge of the road, and you're just kind of like diving all your attention into that one point of focus, right? Meditation style, there is called single pointed focus, where you just practice on coming back to the same point of focus over and over again. And road cycling, you know, you've got the white line, or your handlebars, or like the horizon. And then mountain biking, it's the line of the trail. And when you get into the flow state, you can see the line, which is pretty amazing, that your brain has the ability to digest information like obstacles and rocks and turns and twisty stuff and texture even of the trail. Like, your brain is able to intake that information and process it so quickly that it can find a line that at some point you can just find yourself totally like zenned out on a mountain bike trail, just flowing and moving, and it's really powerful. So I think that I've really come to appreciate how mountain biking can bring up so much stuff. Like, you can be terrified. Like, for me, there were times of just like literal tears of frustration, of fear, and, you know, being able to push through that to find the flow state and be able to get into a bit of a meditative state, it's so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. So what pushed you towards mountain biking?
Well, I got into cycling again as an adult when I was 25, I think. I'd just come back from living in Honolulu, and I didn't have a car of my own, so I wanted to buy a bike, and my boyfriend Brian, he knew I was really into hiking a lot, and he said, you know, you should like think about buying a mountain bike. And at the time I was like, no way. I am not a mountain biking type of person. But I listened to what he said, and I considered what type of bike would suit me best, and ultimately it was a mountain bike. So I bought a cross-country hardtail, a chisel, at Carytown Bikes. Shout out to Will Hart, sold me the bike. So I bought a cross-country hardtail, and I was kind of just riding that around town to get from point A to point B.
Right.
And then I started to explore mountain biking, and really, I mean, it was my boyfriend Brian who really pushed me into the sport, and I think he's helped me to learn a lot. But I think what I love is the racing aspect of it. I love competition. I was getting into triathlon before I was into mountain biking, and before that was competitive swimming. So I've always had a bit of a competitive edge in me. And so the transition to mountain biking was kind of natural, because I was getting into cycling so I could get into triathlon. And then ultimately I got tired of riding a mountain bike in triathlon, so I bought a road bike.
Smart.
Yeah, way faster. And then, you know, training for triathlon, it's an endurance sport, so you just really need a lot of time in the saddle, as they would say. And so road biking fills that. Also, you know, you can race on a road bike. So yeah, I just got really competitive. I joined a mountain bike race team, and started doing a bunch of mountain bike racing. And it's crazy because, like, I can remember so vividly saying to myself, I'm just not a mountain biking type of person.
Yeah, you were until you weren't, right?
Yeah, I find myself really enjoying competition in the woods. I like to compete, and when you're in the woods on a mountain bike, at least for me, I experience the races as being alone for a lot of the race. So you're racing yourself, and you're racing your own mindset on each day, like how you show up to the race and what your outlook is on how you're feeling that day. You're ultimately racing yourself, and I think that's what continues to draw me back to mountain bike racing.
What sort of mountain bike races have you done?
I've done several kind of local, regional, all in Virginia, and at several state parks mainly. So I race at Pocahontas State Park a lot, which I love. There's gravel, it's awesome. There's gravel out there, and there's single track. So done multiple of both surface type there at Pocahontas, Monster Cross, Tour de Pocahontas, Guts Gravel Glory, which is actually coming up in just a few weeks. And then I've also raced York River State Park, Douthid State Park for Middle Mountain Mama twice, York River, several races in a few different seasons, and then Camp Hilbert, which is actually a JCC property in Goochland, and then Leaks Mill Park in Goochland, Hoo-Ha. I always want to call it Hoo-Ha Hootenanny, but it's not actually called that. I think it's just called Hoo-Ha, which is at Massanutten. I raced there twice. It's really rocky and technical terrain. It's really different than what we have here at Pocahontas. It's still like tight, forested, single track, but it's just so much more technical.
I bet.
And Douthid State Park is super technical, very steep. And then, of course, the big race that I've completed on the mountain bike is the Shenandoah Mountain 100K, which I felt like kind of just like so far the peak of where, or at least the crest, right, of where I've gotten on a mountain bike was that it's part of the National Ultra Endurance race series, so a lot of really fast, powerful people show up, but it is still just like a regional mountain bike race, so it's still just a bunch of like dirty, like weird Richmond people out there in the woods, and we're camping out in the field and wake up in the morning and just decide to ride a bike all freaking day long up in the mountains and just really challenge yourself. And that race took me 8.5 hours to complete on a hardtail.
Wow.
It was pretty grueling, but I think getting to the finish line in one piece really showed me how deep I can truly dig and how tough I can be when I put my mind to it.
That's incredible. Yeah. I haven't done 100K on a trail, but I have done 100K in April on road. It was one of the Dirtbags 100 Outpost rides, which were super fun.
Yeah.
And I also did my first century also on road on the Virginia Capitol Trail in May. That was a great time too. So I definitely would love to do a longer trail ride. So I'm looking for more opportunities to do that, the year ahead. I'm really interested in doing Monster Cross in 2024.
It's so fun. It's so fun. It's like just so much energy. People are just excited to be out there. I think that's also kind of creates the vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Mountain Cat has been growing in popularity in the past couple of years, and I definitely don't think I'm good enough to do Mountain Cat yet, but if I can, get a mountain bike with suspension and get some more experience under my belt, I'll definitely consider taking that on.
Yeah, I think that race is like a war of attrition, kind of is what I understand it to be.
Right.
But it looks amazing.
Yeah, I know Emily Monroe. She used to work at Carytown Bikes. Now she works at Sports Backers.
Yeah.
She's the primary organizer for that, and they put so much work into making that an amazing local-based race. And I know people have been starting to come from all over to do it, and it's got great reviews so far, so I'm sure it's only going to get better.
Yeah, I've worked with Emily a bit in her time at Sports Backers this year, actually, quite a bit, and she continues to impress me with how kind and compassionate, and we're just really committed to the cycling community she is.
Yeah.
She's just amazing. I just love her.
Yeah, I don't know her very well personally, but we're in similar social circles, and we have a lot of mutual friends, so we're bound to cross paths eventually.
Yeah.
But before you got into mountain biking, you were getting more involved with road cycling, right?
I would say the road cycling came as a result of wanting to get faster.
Okay.
I think they were kind of synchronous, to be
Okay.
honest.
Yeah, cool. You said you didn't get a road bike until after you had been riding on your mountain bike
Yeah.
for a while?
Yeah.
Right. How did that experience go for you? I'm assuming you did get a lot faster once you had a proper road bike, right?
Yeah. The efficiency of a road bike makes it possible to cover more ground in a shorter amount of time. So that's ultimately what the biggest positive of the road bike for training offers. And so, yeah, I definitely, once I got the road bike, I got the road bike in October 2019, which I was really glad that I had just bought that bike, because then in March the following year was when everything shut down for the pandemic.
Right.
And Brian had kind of been peer pressured or ultimately just influenced to also buy a road bike right before the pandemic started. So we had just kind of started to dip our toes into what is our personal potential on these super efficient machines, right? Like road bike tires offer so little resistance on the road that ultimately like huge distances become more feasible.
Right.
And that's ultimately what the purpose of a bicycle is. That's the invention, right? It's a machine that helps us move more efficiently through the world and through the environment. So right when COVID hit, we both got furloughed, and we had these road bikes that were sick road bikes that we had just invested in, and we just decided to ride like a lot of miles that year, 2020. I think I rode 5,000 miles in 2020. Definitely that was the most time I'd ever spent on a bike. Both bikes at that time. We had two bikes. We both had mountain bikes and road bikes. So it was just this amazing opportunity to explore. And obviously all the state parks were open during that time. So we were really taking advantage of going to the park and being in nature and riding our bikes through the woods and exploring the terrain that is here in Virginia, whether that's on the road or on the mountain bike trails. And yeah, it just expanded my horizons, but it really increased my fitness quite a bit.
Awesome. Your boyfriend, Brian, he sounds like he's quite the avid cyclist as well, so he's doing it along with you.
Yeah, I was really into mountain biking before he met me. So he moved to Richmond, and we were dating, and he didn't know about Pocahontas State Park. And then we like went on a date, like a little sexy hike date, right? And I took him to Pocahontas State Park, where I'd been hiking, and we were hiking on a mountain bike trail, and it was kind of like I saw this like light bulb go off in his head. It's like, whoa, like, these are mountain bike trails. And he bought a new mountain bike, and so he got into mountain biking in Richmond with all the experience of mountain biking in places that he had lived before.
Like where?
He lived in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for 10 years.
Okay, yeah.
So that was a lot of Western mountain bike experience. And then for that he was in Toronto, and then before that he was in kind of the country of Virginia. And I think that's where his mountain biking love affair started, was where he spent time as a teenager in Rappahannock County, Virginia.
So he's used to riding on mountains, basically.
Yeah, big mountains. But What's interesting is that East Coast trails are really technical and they're really tight and they're forested, so it's like a totally different mountain bike experience. The trails here really require a lot of like constant attention to detail, and I think out there in the West, like it's big out there. It's big sky country, right? It's just bigger, and so trails are really like covering a lot more distance, and they may not be as tight and technical as the trails that we have here on the East Coast. Obviously, technical trails exist everywhere, but he's definitely communicated with me that riding out west was a different game than riding here in the East Coast.
Yeah, I bet. What was your experience like with doing triathlons? When did you start doing those?
Must have been maybe May of 2019. I think I started triathlon. I think I did a spring race on a mountain bike, and then I did a fall race on a mountain bike, and then I said, no more mountain bike in this sport. Like, I need to go fast. So I bought the road bike in October of that year. So I started triathlon here, just regional races. I really enjoy racing at Lake Anna because the water is so clean and relatively warm. So I've done several races at Lake Anna, sprint and Olympic distance.
Nice. Is it still warm even in the fall, like around October?
Yeah, it's actually really warm in the fall because it's been warm all summer, so it has kind of an inertia. It's cold in the spring, but it's still relatively warmer than it would be naturally because it is a nuclear cooling pond.
Okay,
so
good to know.
It is. I always tell people that we come out of the water like just glowing a little bit. But yeah, the Lake Anna nuclear power plant is Lake Anna is man-made, so the water is used to cool the nuclear reactor, and they say it's safe, so I'm just gonna believe them. But it's warm. Yeah, it's warmer than it would be naturally. So I think the coldest water I swum in there was like 66, like 65, 66, 67. That was pretty shocking because I just really didn't. I was determined to not wear a wetsuit. Right.
What is the minimum temperature of the water that allows you to wear a wetsuit? I know is it with the USA Triathlons that sets that standard?
I think so. Yeah, there's definitely rules. I don't know that off the top of my head. I think it's like 72 might be like the warmest you can wear a wetsuit. Like there's a cutoff on cold and there's a cutoff on warm. So the cutoff on cold is at a certain temperature, it's wetsuit required.
Okay, really?
For safety, because obviously you get hypothermia.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have hypothermia in a race.
Right. The race will still go on even if the weather's cold, if the water is cold.
Yeah. So there's a certain cutoff. It might be 65, 63, somewhere in there, maybe. And then there's a cutoff for how warm the water is. That it's now wetsuit prohibited because you become more buoyant when you wear a wetsuit. So it's almost like cheating a little bit if you wear a wetsuit in warm water. Kind of. But yeah, that race that I didn't wear the wetsuit, I placed really well in the field because I didn't have to struggle to get my wetsuit off when I got out of the water. Yeah. So I benefited from not wearing the wetsuit, but I was shocked. I mean, getting into water that cold was like.
Had you swam in water that cold before?
Yeah, I think so. My swim team had a swim in Smith Mountain Lake in a few open water races when I was a teenager, and that water is really chilly. I don't know what the actual temperature was on the day that we were swimming in there, but it was it was shocking. Like when you get in, like your whole body kind of
seizes
tenses
up a bit,
and you breathe strangely. So
Have you done any like cold water exposure, like cold plunges or ice baths or anything like that?
No, I'm actually pretty much a cold weenie, I would say. I really don't like cold air, cold water. I really don't enjoy that. I think I've considered doing some cold water stuff, but I never have. Yeah, never gotten into it. How about you? Have you gotten into cold water stuff?
Yeah, a little bit. I've done some like natural cold water exposure dips, I guess you could call them. Some locally at the James River. Also, like my step parents, they live in Sun Valley, Idaho. They're her parents. We just got married in October, so they're my step parents by way of my wife. But yeah, anyways, we took a hike when we were out there a couple of summers ago, and we went to this glacier lake, and I got in there for like 20 or 30 minutes, and that was really nice. Took a while to acclimate, but I really enjoyed that.
Wow.
My wife got this beautiful photo of me sitting in there peacefully, just like holding my arms across my chest, trying like to be calm.
Yeah.
But I had my first dip into a actual cold plunge tub the day after I finished my first Century bike ride. One of my friends who was a guest on season 1 of the podcast, Mike Metzger, he has a cold plunge at his house. So he let us get in there to recover.
Okay.
And I only lasted like 30 seconds at 48 degrees.
Yeah, that's
but
really
it was
cold.
still really freaking cold. Yeah. Yeah, and as far as triathlons go, I actually just did my first triathlon in April. It was a half sprint, so it was a very short race, but it was a good experience.
Where was it?
It was in Glen Allen.
Okay.
It was sponsored by the Live Red Foundation. They were doing their East Coast Triathlon Festival. Mostly it was like youth triathlons, but they also did an adult age group triathlon later on in the day, and that's the one I participated in.
Where did you guys swim?
So in Glen Allen, like relatively close to Shore Pump, off Cox Road, there's like this business park, and there's a lake in the middle of the business center.
Is it
there.
Innsbruck?
Yeah, in the Innsbruck area, exactly. So we swam there. We swam out to like one of the fountains at the lake there, and then swam off to the side to go to the bike stage. The swim part was very challenging for me because I honestly did not train to swim at all, and I don't have a lot of swimming experience. I learned to swim when I was a kid, and I've swam like here and there. I started trying to train to swim like in 2017 or 2018, when I initially had the idea that I wanted to do triathlons, and I joined YMCA so I could use their pool. But then I decided I just wanted to prioritize getting tattooed and not swimming as much. So I made the decision to come back to it later, but didn't really prioritize the swimming. And I figured, it's a short race. I know how to swim. What could go wrong, right? So, I did the swim. It was really cold. I didn't have a wetsuit. The water temperature, what I think was around like 60 some degrees. And some people even like got in the water and they're like, no, I'm not gonna do that. So I was really proud of myself that I at least did it, even though I had to like switch back and forth between freestyle and backstroke to like just get through it, just get it done. And after I finished the swim part, even though I was one of the last people to finish the swim, it got progressively easier from there because I have a lot more experience as a cyclist and as a runner. So I crossed that off my list, and I definitely learned that I do need to train to swim a lot and, really improve in that area. Also getting a road bike would be helpful. I had a road bike, but My frame got busted. Like, I took it to Outpost to get serviced, and they told me that the frame was bent, so they couldn't actually do anything with it. But I had my gravel bike with me, and I rode that. So it's kind of similar that we've had that experience of like riding a mountain bike in a triathlon.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I definitely want to get a mountain bike for proper mountain bike riding, and I want to get a road bike for proper road bike riding. But the gravel bike that I have is like the happy medium.
Yeah, it is a happy medium.
Yeah.
I really am sweating a titanium gravel bike these days, but we don't have the space in our apartment. We already have 4 bikes and a whitewater raft crammed into a second bedroom in an apartment here in the city. So for now, you know, they say that the right number of bikes is always n+1, right? It's always like the right number is always one more, but for right now, no more. I'll have to do with the mountain bike. And the cross-country hardtail, it actually does really well on gravel. So, yeah.
Okay, good
I've done really well in some gravel races at Pocahontas State Park. So these are small regional gravel races, not like big Belgian waffle ride, anything like that, but just on a regional scale, on a Richmond scale. Definitely the hardtail mountain bike can do really, really well at Guts Gravel and Glory and at Monster Cross. Maybe even have the advantage depending upon what the conditions are like.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching Evolved Podcast. This episode is brought to you by our sponsors. Evolved Goods was founded on the ethos that this podcast was started on, pursuing personal growth with a positive mindset. Our clothing are a reflection of that. Our first line, the Standard, which launched earlier this year, is now available on our website, evolvedgoods.co. And we will be launching our second line this summer called Soak It Up. So follow us on Instagram at evolvedgoods.co and check out our website for more clothing drops coming soon. This podcast is also sponsored by True Nutrition. Use Evolved Podcast to get 5% off all True Nutrition supplements. I'm personally a fan of their soy isolate vegan protein powder, available in a variety of flavors and strengths from light to heavy. They also have non-vegan protein powders if that's not your thing. I recommend the cookies and cream flavor in heavy strength, and I add it to waffles, oatmeal, and protein shakes. They're delicious. Check out their wide range of supplements at affordable prices that are third-party tested and verified for content quality. They are able to provide such great prices because their supplements come direct from the manufacturer without any marketing gimmicks or fancy labels. Visit truenutrition.com to supplement your workouts and nutrition. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 10% off all weight train and Athleticity gym gear and apparel. No matter what you need for your workouts, they have the gear to help you get it done. They have great clothes for the gym wear, for men and women. Visit weighttrain.com for all your gym gear needs. Last is not dead yet. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 15% off all clothing and accessories. The goat shorts and shirts are some of the most comfortable clothing I've ever worn, and they have the coolest designs. However, their drops are only available in limited quantities, so get your favorites while you can, and be on the lookout for other drops you're stoked on. Visit notdeadyet.com for clothing to remind the world you are not dead yet. Now, back to the show.
So, I want to get into your bike collision and injury. Before we get into that, I want to talk about Jonah.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So tell me about your relationship with Jonah, like before all of that happened.
I know Jonah from Project Yoga Richmond, which is where we met. I've met a lot of amazing people there, and Jonah was one of those amazing people. And I met her, I started going to Project Yoga in probably 2013, maybe 2012, 2013, it's kind of hazy. And I met Jonah there, and we just practiced yoga next to each other for many years. I didn't really know her that well, except that we would chat before and after class, and saw her there a lot. And you get to know people if you just listen to what they have to say. And then I did a stint as the manager of Project Yoga Richmond, the studio manager. And so I was spending a lot of time in the studio.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just got to know Jonah better and better. We had a lot of mutual friends, and then kind of we're just starting to get to know each other as cyclists. That summer, which is last summer, we really hadn't spent a lot of time together on bikes at all. It was mainly from the yoga studio.
Okay. So when did you start riding together?
So really crazy. Actually, the day that we were hit was the first time that Jonah and I rode bikes together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And like, can you take us through like what exactly happened from your perspective?
Well, my perspective is kind of interesting because I don't remember that morning hardly at all.
Right.
I remember, well, I guess I really have to start the story a few weeks before.
Sure.
So I turned 30 last summer, and it was a big moment for me, and I kind of had this sense, this like growing sense that my life was changing. And Jonah came to my 30th birthday, and I was telling her this, like, we're sitting there at Hardin, over there on was it Main
Lombardi
Street?
and Cary.
Lombardi and
Yeah.
Main Street, and
Right.
even that porch just has like a lot of energy for me, because I used to hang out there all the time when I was in college, and I actually celebrated my 21st birthday on that patio too.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was kind of like a coming of age then, and then a totally different coming of age. If anyone's been in Richmond a long time, they remember that years ago that was Baja Beans.
Right.
So that was like perfect for a 21st birthday, and then now it's Hardin, which is like a beautiful wine garden, and it's also really appropriate for a 30th birthday.
Yeah.
So Jonah and I were there, and I was telling her, like, man, I just really feel like my life is about to change. And in the weeks leading up to August 13th, I was actually training for a mountain bike race, and we'd gone out to Pleasant Grove to test ride the trails, and I just like couldn't shake this really bad vibe. And you know, at the time I was telling myself, like, yeah, I can't do this mountain bike race. I'm just not feeling it. Like, the trails are technical, but there's something else going on. It's something with me. Like, I've got some type of bad vibe about that race, which was on Saturday morning. So I skipped out on the race, and Brian went out there to ride it. And actually I hit up Jonah, and I said, hey, like, Brian's going to the race, but I'm not in for it, so you want to ride with me? And there's an awesome yoga class that Jay Miles is teaching at Sankofa Community Orchard, and we can ride out into the battlefields and then go across the river and do yoga and like do like check all the like hippie boxes that we want to check that day. And she was like, yeah, let's do it. So we met up at the BMFA that morning. It was so beautiful. I think I actually have a photo on my phone that I took that morning of the moon. It was like huge in the sky. I took this photo at like 6:30, and the moon was just so bright in the sky. And Jonah was a few minutes late, so I waited for her there in front of the Rumors of War statue, and showed up, and we took off, and that's really the last thing that I remember. But according to the crash report, and actually there were people also riding bikes that morning who saw us. I think someone reached out to my parents after the accident and said, oh yeah, we were riding with Natalie and Jonah up until like the split right at the 7-Eleven, which is up on the Capitol Trail. So yeah, there were other people out that morning who rode with us. I just don't remember that. I can remember like watching Jonah in front of me. Like I had a mental image of that, seeing her in front of me. But the crash report says that it was around 7:30 in the morning, and we were hit by a allegedly drunk driver. His trial is actually starting on July 27th, so he actually hasn't been convicted of anything. He's charged with drunk driving, driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol. But we were hit at 7:30, less than a mile off the Capitol Trail. Out of the city, you come up to Osborne Turnpike, and there's a 7-Eleven there. It's kind of a good, what do they call it when it's like I'm blanking on the word.
Rest stop.
A landmark.
A landmark.
A landmark. Yeah. That's what it is. It's a landmark. So that's where we split from the Cap Trail and went on to Osborne Turnpike. We were going to ride down to the lily pad and like up through Fort Harrison battlefields and then back into the city. And we were hit less than a mile after the 7-Eleven when we turned off to Osborne. And Jeffrey, the driver, was reported to have been driving 60 miles an hour, they estimate. He was seen speeding by other drivers. There were other calls about a driver driving recklessly. But yeah, he hit us there on Osborne, and yeah.
And he was underage too, right?
He's 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm just been wondering, like, where were you in relation to Jonah when you guys were hit? Was she still in front of you? You don't know?
We'll never know. We will never know
in the
that.
crash report.
Well, how would they know that? They weren't even there.
Yeah, that's true.
So we'll never know exactly what was going on, but I know that morning Jonah would not ride two abreast, right, which is two riders right next to each other, because I told her, let's do that. Basically, I was like, we can just chat, like we can chit chat, we can ride right next to each other. And she would not do that because she didn't feel safe doing it. And then she said it was like the law that had legalized that had been rolled back, and I wasn't knowledgeable, and she wasn't comfortable. So I just knew that we weren't riding two abreast. I don't know if I was in front or behind. It's hard to tell. I would assume that I was behind her. And I think that's what the crash report implies. The crash report says that, so I was hit and I was thrown into the ditch.
Yeah, that's what I assumed had happened.
Yeah, and so that's not how Jonah experienced the crash. So I'm not going to dive too much into the details with her because it's very emotional for her family to think about what Jonah experienced that morning. Still, they really struggle with thinking about that. But so my experience was that I was thrown into the ditch, and I was hit from behind the left side at around 60 miles an hour. So it pitched me off the road into the ditch, which is where the EMTs found me.
First of all, on behalf of the Richmond cycling community, I'm so sorry that you guys had to experience that, and I'm especially sorry to Jonah's family as well as your family for the loss that you've endured as a result of that.
Thank you.
On another note, I, in my past, was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. I was arrested in 2012, and since then I've quit drinking alcohol. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, in addition to, our mutual love for cycling and endurance sport, is part of my effort of making living amends to people who were hurt by drunk drivers. And I'm thankful that when I was driving under the influence. I didn't hurt anyone, never got the opportunity to do so. I was pulled over before, I got on any highway. I didn't get very far from where I was at to where I was going, which is for the best. I've spoken to this earlier on other podcast episodes. At the time, I thought that was the worst thing that happened to me. Now I know it was the best thing because, I had a lot of personal issues that I really struggled with, as far as how I viewed myself, how I viewed my relationship with my family. I was very unhappy with my job, and I acted in reckless ways, and that was one of the consequences of that. As a result of me getting arrested and convicted of a DUI, I had to go to group therapy, and that helped me to really look at why I was behaving that way, how my life had gotten to that point. And through going to therapy and starting to be more analytical about my past, really helped me to create a better future. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'm glad that you've been able to make a recovery, and get back to, being the beautiful person that you are today.
Thank you. It's been quite a journey. I think the physical recovery is one thing, and to be honest, I'm amazed that I've been able to physically recover so well. I experienced life-threatening injuries, multiple life-threatening injuries.
Yeah.
Both of my hip sockets were broken. My collarbone was broken. I had 6 broken ribs. I had a grade 3 liver laceration, and I'm covered in road rash. I think I had some broken bones in my face as well. And all of that was really hard to recover from. And, I had to have all these life-saving surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an abdominal exploratory laparotomy, which is basically my abdominal cavity was cut open so they can save my life, repair my liver. And then I had major orthopedic repairs to my left hip socket. So I have 2 plates, a pen, a giant pen, and then a bunch of screws in my left hip socket. And then my collarbone has a couple plates and a bunch of screws. And so there was the accident and the injuries that happened as a result of the accident. Then there was a layer of orthopedic recovery, so having muscles cut, because most of my injuries, I did have organ damage, but the majority of my physical injuries other than that were broken bone,
mm-hmm.
which bones can just fix themselves. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they just grow back. But orthopedic surgery involves cutting muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So recovering from surgical incisions has definitely been a lot of work in the gym, just building muscle back.
Right.
But then there was all this mental growth that I had to kind of push myself through to overcome all of the things that go along with waking up and finding yourself in a hospital bed. I was intubated for several days after the accident, and then when they pulled the breathing tube out, it's kind of when I woke up. I think I was a little bit conscious before that because they drew down the drugs, right, to pull the breathing tube out.
Mm-hmm.
But I really only remember all of a sudden being awake and not having the respirator over my face.
Just to be clear, were you in a coma after your accident?
I was medicated.
Okay.
So I wouldn't call it a coma exactly. I would call it a deep opioid sleep, basically.
Okay.
So I went into the emergency room, and I've been told by VCU Health and the team of incredible medical professionals who took care of me, but I have heard that from the moment I was rolled into the emergency room at VCU, within 10 minutes, I was in the operating room being prepped for surgery. 10 minutes. So they basically sedated me right then and there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of full body x-rays that were done while I was in a sedated state, but basically my abdominal surgery, I was bleeding internally, so I was gonna die if they didn't fix my liver. So that was immediate. And then the orthopedic surgeries were delayed by days. I mean, almost a week and a half I laid in a hospital bed with broken pelvis with my leg in traction, waiting until I was physically ready for the surgery. You know, waking up and not knowing, how did this happen? Where am I? Who are these people? I think I've been told by my family that I just kept asking, like, which bike was it? The EMTs told me that, and when I say the EMTs told me, what's interesting about that is I met all of my medical professionals after my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So I was unconscious when I met all my ER doctors,
Right.
but I've met them since. And with the EMTs, I don't remember the day of the accident at all, but when I met the EMTs post-recovery, who saved me from the road, they told me that I just kept asking over and over again from the accident site, what happened, which bike? Of course I was asking which bike,
Right.
Where was I? All these questions, and so I was totally out of it. So I was not in a coma, but I was medicated really heavily for, I think it was between 3 and 4 days that I had a breathing tube in. And mainly the breathing tube was to make sure that I was breathing, because when you give someone that much
sedative,
yeah, they can just not breathe.
Right.
So I think the breathing tube was basically to just support my lungs while I was so deeply medicated.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I have an amazing team at BCU Health that supported me through, I mean, life-altering pain.
Mm-hmm.
Truly. I mean, to the point where I was in so much pain that I could barely speak. I couldn't do anything on my own. Like, I couldn't move my body in bed because my collarbone was broken on one side and then my pelvis was broken on both sides. And so, like, I couldn't roll. My leg was in traction. Like, I couldn't do anything for myself. If there was like a wrinkle underneath of me in the sheet, like, I had to call the nurse to come and like help me get the wrinkle out from underneath of me. And so the medical team that cared for me, they are ultimately the secret sauce that contributed to me being able to recover from this so well physically. But then I really attribute my mental recovery to my yoga practice.
How your yoga practice helped your mental recovery?
Well, I guess to start from even just kind of like the grossest to the most subtle aspects of that. First, it was my breath, coming back to my breath. Being in immense pain can often make people hold their breath.
Yeah.
And so just for me and my yoga practice, I wasn't able to move my body at all. So yoga didn't look like stretching, or what we would call asana was totally out of the question. But coming back to the breath, even in maybe the worst moments of pain, making sure that I was breathing fully and exhaling completely, just tracking my breath from top to bottom and coming back to it really helped me to, first off, oxygenate my body and my brain so I felt physically better, but then also helped me to stay present with what's actually going on instead of all of the like storytelling of like, my life is over, I'll never do X, Y, and Z again. Like, you can really spiral into some super, super negative self-talk in moments like that. And when it's accompanied by immense physical pain, it's just so much negative input. But being able to just stay with my breath afforded me the ability to stay calm and stay collected and stay present in reality. Like, what am I actually experiencing? Not what am I imagining that I'm experiencing? So I think the other part of the yoga practice experience for me through this accident has been coming back to my values. So I've been practicing yoga since I was 17, around 17. And for years I was just going to yoga class and I wasn't really getting that deep into it. But then when I took my yoga teacher training and I learned about kind of what Buddhists would call the Eightfold Path, or what yogis would call like the 8 petals of the lotus of yoga. There's the first 2 are the yamas and the niyamas, and they're basically how to live. It's ethics and suggestions on like your life will be better, your experience with yourself, with your community, and with your practice will be better if you practice these restraints and positive things. So there's things not to do and there's things to do, and those make up the yamas and the niyamas, which is kind of like the yoga values. And when I went through teacher training, I just really tried to kind of accept all of those things into my life as deeply as I could. I'm not a saint. I don't like think of myself as like a bodhisattva who's like enlightened, but I think that having those values and being able to reach back to them in times when you maybe have lost your way or you don't know which is the right direction, like coming back to what are the things that I hold to be true and what are the things that I really value in humanity and in my practice. Having a guidebook like that in the yoga practice helped me to wade through really, really challenging experiences and not lose myself and not lose who am I, who is the person who I want to be, and how do I want to show up in my community as that person. And so what that looked like for me in this accident was greeting my nurses by their names when they came into my room and thanking them for every single thing that they did for me, even if it sucked. Like having my like horrible road rash, like wound cleaning done. This lady named Fern would come in and like she would like pull these bandages off my road rash, and it was awful. I mean, just not something that you want to experience, but she was helping me. And so like for me, diving back into the yoga ethics of ahimsa, which is non-harming, is just letting people know that I appreciate what you're doing and not taking my pain out on you as my nurse, which I'm sure is something that they experience all the time. But ultimately, it was about them, but even more so, it was about me and connecting with who am I? Like, what do I value? Like, pain can be suffocating. It can literally rob you of all the energy that you have and all the willingness to be alive. I mean, you can literally find yourself in moments saying like, I wish that I was dead right now because of the amount of pain that all of these drugs that they're giving me is still not making it go away. But in those moments, I think coming back to, you know, values that I have like Siva, which is service to my community. This is something that I've lived by for, you know, the past 10 plus years working in the nonprofit industry. Just the belief that I exist to create a better community. That is my purpose. Like, I exist to serve other people, not in a self-deprecating way, but in an uplifting way, that I have a positive place in community, and if I keep showing up positively, that I can make a difference, even if it's really small. And coming back to the value of Siva, even in moments of extreme pain, made me feel like, what is the service that I can do for my nurses? Like, I can brighten their day. Like, I can be kind or funny. Like, I can joke with them. Like, I can sing at them. Like, I can smile. I can watch, like, naked and afraid on my hospital television like all day long, and like have cool stuff in the room so that when they come in here it's like a positive experience. I can't control what's happening to my body right now, but I can control the way that I treat other people and the way that I show up for this community who's caring for me.
That's amazing. So I didn't know of you until after your accident happened. I feel like it was only a matter of time before we may have met each other, but you know, I'm glad that I do know you now, because you seem like such an incredible person, and the community has really come together to support you, and I know, and to support Jonah and her family as well. I think, was it a month or so after the accident, they did like Rabba organized the big ride to honor her. Is that correct? And you were there for that?
Let me think of the timelines. You know, things are not super clear about the time that I was in the hospital. I didn't even have a cell phone because it still was an
And I wanted to talk about that too.
Yeah.
I started following you on Instagram and Facebook, and I saw that Brian was making a lot of updates on your page to let people know how you were doing.
Yeah,
right?
my phone was in the evidence room of the Henrico Police Department for it was about a month. Yeah, it was a month. I actually had already left the hospital and gone into skilled nursing when I finally got my phone back. So I didn't personally have a lot of connection to what was going on outside of the hospital, and to be honest, I didn't have a lot of bandwidth.
Of course.
I just felt like I really had to focus on just getting better at that time.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Obviously my family was with me all the time, and Brian was with me all the time, and they were telling me everything that was going on. And I know that Rabba organized a big ride shortly after the accident. It was a big turnout. I also know that Project Yoga Richmond organized a big yoga class at Chimborazo, and I think Holly Zazier was up there teaching, and Izzy Shirt and Jay Miles. They organized maybe Andrew Bloomquist with a line as well. They were up there in Chimborazo Park kind of getting the word out about what had happened to us and trying to raise support for Jonah's family and her kids and for my medical expenses. And then I know that Gelati Celesti had an ice cream fundraiser that was, I think my cousin Rachel was involved in somehow making that happen. And so, yeah, basically everything that I was hearing when my family would come into the room was that I was so supported. And I mean, obviously it felt amazing to know that I had so many people in my corner, and that what happened to Jonah didn't happen and get swept under the rug, that people really cared about her. And I think ultimately, you know, people's love for Jonah and her notoriety in the community has created opportunity for me that I never would have had without her. And so in some ways, Jonah still influences my life. I mean, on a daily basis, people reach out and say that they knew Jonah and they want to share their memories with me about Jonah. And so even now, she is continuing to build community and to build connections between people that maybe wouldn't know each other otherwise. And I think that says a lot about who she is as a person, is that her legacy continues, and it's a very positive legacy. She's good. She's a good influence.
I agree. And I didn't get a chance to know Jonah, but I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. So we're gonna wrap up. I just have a few more questions.
I'm not in a rush.
Okay, no worries. So I'm sure things have changed, you know, post injuries. But what does your morning routine look like now?
Okay. So I'm going to sound like a crazy person a little bit. I am actually one of those freaks of the night who go to the gym at 5:15 every morning.
Okay.
So
Freaks of the early morning.
Yeah, freaks of the darkness.
Yeah.
It feels like nighttime sometimes when you wake up at 5 a.m. It still feels like so quiet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so before my accident, I was waking up early-ish and sometimes going on some rides with Roll Call, REA, and they're vampires, that
for
crew.
real.
And they ride at 5:45, but I live like a block and a half from the meetup, so I could get up like at the last second and like make it there.
Nice.
And I like early mornings. I've always loved the sunrise, but these days, post-accident, I was in the hospital for a month, then I was in skilled nursing for a month, and then I was home for a month before I went back to work. And even during that month, I was waking up early and going to the gym, and like all I could do was like sit on a recumbent bike and just like pedal. But I love getting up and moving my body early in the morning, and so it's just gotten more extreme lately. Is that now I get up at 4:50, we walk into the gym at 5:20, and leave at 6:20, and then have a little breakfast, and then jet off to work. And then at work, I'm often pretty active during the day too. Like, this week I've been teaching a bunch of group fitness classes, and yoga and Pilates, and it's a lot of movement, which I'm really grateful for.
Right. And I'm so glad that you've been able to make such a great recovery, since movement is such a big part of your life and part of your job too.
For sure. But I think also movement is kind of the antidote to, traumatic injury. Like, there is a future after traumatic injury. Like, when I was first injured, some of the thoughts that went through my head were just like, I'll never do this again. In particular, one that I even struggle to right now and possibly will forever is I'll never run again, is kind of what I'm working through lately. But just every day consciously pushing myself to move my body, I believe, has been one of the things that has helped me recover so well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just listened to a great podcast. Rich Roll I've been listening to for years now, and he had on Julie and Kelly Starrett, and they just put out a book about the importance of movement, especially for kids, in terms of overall like health and longevity throughout life. And it's supposed to be like a guidebook for movement, for people who have questions about what to do. So that just made me think of how, like you were describing, movement being the antidote, because I think that piece, that phrase, is really foundational to their practice as well. Just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
I think it applies to so many different ailments, right? Movement is the antidote to physical disability in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Like, even with a disability, you can still move your body and you can feel better in your body.
Right, and the physical movement also assists with the mental health as well. Getting outside, especially in nature, there's the science to back that up as well, that it's beneficial for you, getting the fresh air, literally. Looking at nutrition, what's one of your go-to meals that helps you feel your best?
Okay, so every morning for breakfast I have scrambled eggs, sometimes with a little bit of like ground turkey mixed in, but that's been a game changer for me. I was doing intermittent fasting for several years before my accident, and it was great. Like, I loved it. I felt I felt like it was the right choice for me at the time. Post-accident, the focus has been building muscle. So because of my accident and my hospitalization, I lost 25 pounds in 3.5 weeks. So I basically wasted away and I lost all my muscle, and recovery for me has looked like consciously intaking protein. So in the hospital, they were feeding me protein drinks for breakfast, and then now I'm just eating scrambled eggs as my protein for breakfast. But instead of intermittent fasting, I'm still getting probably 14 hours of fast just by like the hour that I sleep until the hour that I eat breakfast. But having the protein, it fuels me for the day, and I just feel like it's really helped me to I've put on probably about 20 pounds of muscle back, and I believe that added protein has been kind of the key to it.
Do you feel like your body recomposition is better than it was before the accident, or is it about the same?
That's so interesting. I was definitely stronger pre-accident, but I don't think I'll be able to say that for much longer. I'm starting to really come back to ability, particularly the way that I measure that is with some of the kind of compound lifts in the gym, and where my deadlift is now versus where it was pre-accident. I'm not there, but I can see that I'm making progress by leaps and bounds, which is really encouraging. And so I think before my accident, I was probably about 10 pounds heavier than I am now. But when I say heavier, I mean I also had a lot more muscle on me. I was very dense. Like my legs from cycling were like crazy muscular. Like I had like quads like popping out of my legs. And when I came out of the accident, I didn't have any quads. I could literally barely even lift my legs straight, like sitting in a chair, what they called like a leg lift, right? I could barely do that. And nowadays I'm squatting again, which I'm so grateful for, because just being able to put my hip into that extreme range of motion I'm so lucky. I can't believe that my hip sockets were broken less than a year ago. It's been 10 and a half months since the accident, and I'm in the gym squatting. Not as heavy as I once was, but hey,
you're still doing it.
I'm still moving through that range of motion.
Yeah, and building the strength along the way too. I have no doubt, given the trajectory of your recovery to this point, it's only going to get better from here on out. God forbid you get hurt again, but it seems like you're on a good path to getting stronger and getting back to where you were, and maybe where you want to be.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is that I've learned so much because of all of this, that I'm coming from fitness with more knowledge than I even once had. And I was really into it before the accident, but now having to overcome all of these physical challenges has really helped me to rethink fitness and to rethink disability, right? And me, for a while, being temporarily disabled, where I was using a cane to walk, that was one chapter of my journey. And then now being back in a state where I kind of carry a lifelong invisible disability with my hip, it's really, really helped me to reshape the way that I look at fitness and at risk taking, like how I calculate risk that I want to take on the mountain bike or in whitewater, which is something we've been getting into lately. So I've come at this kind of process, this daily grind of being better physically and mentally. I've come at it from a different perspective than I once had.
If you're willing to talk about it, what's the invisible disability with your hip?
Yeah, so my hip sockets were both broken. So basically, I have a bunch of hardware that holds it in place, but it will never really be the same. I will always have some considerations. I've been told that I will for sure have arthritis in both of my hips. I definitely will need to be seeing my orthopedic surgeon every year to have x-rays done. And some days those joints work better than other days. Some days they feel better. Some days I can feel aching in my bones. And it can be, I would call it, it's more mentally disabling at this point than it is physically disabling for right now. But that's me at 30, and I don't think they usually design orthopedic hardware to be in your body for 70 years, but I'm going to be asking it to stay with me for another 70. I'm 31 now, actually. I just turned 31, but I definitely want to live to be 100. So I am asking quite a bit of this titanium that's in my hip, and ultimately I will have a different aging experience than I would have without the accident. My collarbone, it works different than it used to. It feels different. You know, they can put you back together and you can work really great, you know, like I'm still very capable. And I know that my aging has been, my dad called it that my aging process was sped up, basically. That I will one day experience the physical trauma in ways that I don't experience it today. That I will continue to have an evolving relationship with my traumatic injuries. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. You know, it's a moving target, you know, and it is important to think long term, I guess, in regards to, you know, the condition of your body going forward, not just as it is now, especially with, you know, those installed parts that you will be living with for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and ultimately for me it's the damage to the cartilage inside the joint. So they were able to like kind of bolt the bones back together, and bones heal really well. That's something that they do, but cartilage doesn't really work the same way. And so the damage to the cartilage is kind of the long-term concerns that I'll carry. And that the way that the joints move in the socket is so affected by the cartilage inside of it that, you know, I got my fingers crossed that I can sustain healthy cartilage for many years down the road. And when I said earlier, the kind of the struggle of like, I'll never run again, that's kind of where I come from with that, is that I've been told by my doctors like, well, you can run.
But they wouldn't recommend it, that type of thing.
Or kind of calculate the risk versus reward, and just be clear about what is the risk that you're taking and what is the reward that you get out of it, and if it's worth it, then do it. But if you go through the process of calculating it and you come to a different result or a different decision, well, trust your gut and go with that decision too. Don't just make decisions based on, well, kind of like a FOMO attitude of like, well, I got to do everything. Yeah,
and I'm sure it helps you be intentional too with like the types of movement that you choose to do, and, you know, be more aware of how you're feeling in your body. You know, it's that way you can make that more calculated decision to go for that bike ride or go for that run, whatever it is. And, you know, it's unfortunate that you have to do that now, but, you know, there is some silver lining to that.
Yeah.
So I just have a couple more questions, starting with our recurring segment on the podcast, PMA Warrior of the Week. Who is someone who inspires you to keep a positive mental attitude?
I have two people, and they're both pro cyclists. One's name is Remco Evenepoel, and the other is Egan Bernal. And so both of these pro athletes experienced life-threatening traumatic injuries, kind of within the same time frame as me.
Oh, really?
So last year, Remco Evenepoel, maybe it's a little more than a year, he basically crashed off of a bridge during a pro race and fell down a ravine and broke his pelvis.
Okay.
And then he came back and won the World Road Cycling Championship. And
Wow.
he's in the Rainbow Stripes right now. So, like, he's a boss.
Yeah.
But he came back from a broken pelvis just like me. And so that was definitely, like, watching him do that while I was recovering from my injuries. Like, I would joke with people, like, that could be me. Like, I could win the Road World Championship next year coming back from a broken pelvis. I don't think that's going to happen, but I would just kind of fold that into my mindset that, like, you can overcome really, really traumatic injuries. And so with Egan Bernal, he also has experienced massive physical trauma as a result of a road bike accident. He was on a training ride in his home country of Colombia, and he smashed into a freaking truck. Like, he just wasn't paying attention to what he was doing, and he just, like, hit a truck.
Like from behind?
Yeah, I think he hit a truck. He wasn't looking, and he had life-threatening injuries. He had to relearn how to walk. He was in this crazy like body hardware that was like holding his body still for a while. And I just watched him in the Crit du Dauphiné, which is like the precursor to the Tour de France, and I saw him in the peloton. I was like, oh my gosh, he's back. And then I just saw yesterday that Egan is racing in the Tour de France this year. This is someone who's won the Tour de France before. I think he's won it twice. And then he crashed into that truck and he broke a bunch of stuff in his body, and then comes back to the peloton, and he's competitive. Like, he was in the top 10 of the Crit du Dauphiné. So I'm just so incredibly inspired by these athletes who obviously they have great care teams, and cycling is their livelihood. So in many ways it could feel like maybe they don't have a choice on like whether or not they're going to come back to racing. But just to see what is the human potential, it's incredible that our bodies can truly overcome major challenges, and we can still be happy and active and successful.
Incredible. You've mentioned a lot of mantras and practices that are helpful for you in your personal growth journey. But now we've come to our mindset moment. To sum it all up, could you tell me a quote or phrase that helps you stay positive in personal hardships?
I have this quote that's like I scribbled on an index card, and I kept it on my dresser for a long time, and it's still there, but I reframed it after my accident because it really helped me get through all this. And the quote is, convert every work into yoga with the magic of right attitude.
Convert every work into yoga with the magic of right attitude.
Yeah. So basically, and at least the way I interpret that and have interpreted it, is that every single thing that you do in your life, including the really hard, shitty stuff, is part of your yoga practice. And your response to the things that happen to you in your life, whether it's hitting every single red light on the way to work when you're running late, or whether it's coming into vast wealth, right? Could be negative, positive. The way that you treat each person who you encounter along your path is part of your yoga practice. Do you treat everyone with the same loving kindness that you would treat your mother or your child or even yourself, right? So not tailgating in traffic, not speeding down that neighborhood street, to think about the way that your actions affect other people. That is the work of yoga. It's not easy all the time. Like sometimes life is really challenging and it can be easy to want to distract yourself from it and not do the work. But the work of yoga is staying present and making choices from the base of your values, right? And that comes back to the yamas and the niyamas, that every interaction that you have with the people around you in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state, in your country, in the world, right? This like goes as big as possible, that the way that you interact with the world around you is the yoga practice. And if you come back to your values, each interaction, that is the work. And so for me, recovering from an accident is work, right? But also the like mental work of having to experience all this notoriety following the accident, and you know, being vulnerable with people who I don't really know and being willing to share about this experience. For me, that's part of my work. It's not easy, it's not always fun, but I can convert it into being part of my yoga practice by having the right attitude, and the attitude is that I exist to serve my community.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with me and for being vulnerable with me. It means a lot to me to have you here, and I know it's going to mean a lot to other people too.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And if people want to connect with you and follow along with you on your journey, where can they do that?
I'm on Instagram. I'm not super active, but I know that that's kind of where a lot of people find folks these days. I'm on there. I've been posting a little bit here and there. I'm really active on Facebook. Of course, people can friend request me, but if I don't know you, I might be a little selective. But yeah, I think I have some like plans in the works. I'm starting to kind of like conjure up what the next chapter of yoga teaching looks like for me. So I think that if they find me on one of those channels, I'll be sharing about what's coming next, a little teaser.
Exciting.
Yeah, I think I'm finally coming to a place in my life where I feel like I know myself, and I feel like the next step, that there's so much clarity behind what is the next step that I'll take. So yeah, I would love to connect with people on social media, and they can always find me at SwimRBA as well.
Cool.
Before we close out, I just want to say my 30s have been the best years of my life thus far, and it's unfortunate that you've had this terrible incident occur at the start of your 30s, but now that you're past that and healing from that, I hope that you start to see the magic of your 30s and truly have a rewarding and enriching experience as you get to know yourself better in this special period of your life.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting, I was sharing with you earlier that before my 30th birthday, I just had this like sense that my life was going to change. Yeah. And at that time, I really felt like my life was changing for the better.
Right.
And then I had this accident, and I went through a period of just like, I don't know what the future looks like.
Right.
But then as I started to really recover from my injuries and kind of like things looked brighter again, I realized like, you know, my life actually has changed for the better. Even in spite of all of this. And in some ways, maybe because of it. I think one thing that I'm so grateful for is the connections that I've made with people in the community as a result of this. I think, you know, I was out there and I was social beforehand, but so many people have been willing to support me in more ways than one. Like financially is one thing, but also just like emotionally and just being friends and being willing to talk about this stuff and have me on the podcast and invite my voice into this larger conversation. I'm so grateful for these connections, and so thank you to everybody for being there for me and for being willing to extend friendship to me and especially to Jonah's friends and family, people who I didn't even really know before, but they just have really embraced me and cared for me because they cared so much for Jonah, and they've kind of extended that love to me. I just appreciate that so much. But yeah, I think right now my 30s feels really bright. It feels like the future is really exciting and that my life has changed for the better in spite of everything that's gone on in the past year or so.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Natalie.
thank you.
Thanks for watching Evolved Podcast. Follow at evolvedpodcast.co on Instagram for weekly updates. Subscribe to Evolved Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and like your favorite episodes. Production and editing by Joe Fitzpatrick. Our theme music, Endless Cruise, is written and performed by Fingers, spelled F1NG3RS.